Welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast, empowering and inspiring your journey to optimal health. Hosted by Dr. Supatra Tovar, clinical psychologist, registered dietitian, fitness expert, and author of Deprogram Diet Culture. Rethink your relationship with food, heal your mind, and live a diet-free life. I follow my guests' journey to optimal health, providing you with the keys to unlock your own wellness path. Tune in and evolve with us. Hello and welcome to the ANEW Insight Podcast. I am so excited to have physician, psychologist, and consciousness researcher, Dr. Howard Eisenberg, with us today. Dr. Eisenberg, welcome.
Thank you, Supatra. Thank you for your interest. Thank you.
Yes, of course. I'm going to read a little bit about Howard, and then we're going to get right into our questions. It's okay if I call you Howard, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Dr. Howard Eisenberg is a distinguished physician, psychologist, and consciousness researcher whose career spans over 5 decades. He has served as a lecturer at the University of Toronto and as an associate professor of medicine at the University of Vermont. Dr. Eisenberg is the CEO of Syntrek Inc., an international consultancy specializing in stress management, creative thinking, and executive coaching for Fortune 100 companies. His pioneering work in parapsychology includes authoring the seminal book Inner Spaces, Parapsychological Explorations of the Mind, which became a textbook for his groundbreaking credit course in parapsychology at the University of Toronto. His latest award-winning book, Dream It to Do It, The Science and the Magic, integrates ancient wisdom with contemporary science to explore the true nature of reality and consciousness. Howard, welcome.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction. Thank you again.
Well, you have an amazing background, and I am very interested in all things consciousness. And that's what drew my interest when we were connecting. And so, we always start out on this podcast with a little bit of inspiration. I want to know about your journey. How did you decide, and what made you decide to go into medicine and psychology, and then eventually to branch out into parapsychology?
I welcome your questions. I have to warn you, I can go very wide and very deep.
Good. That's what we like.
And it's not a typical background,
Yes.
but trying to recapitulate in part what you have just asked. I remember in my early childhood, I was naturally or precociously very curious. I wanted to understand things. So in part, what led me to medicine was the deep knowledge I would gain about how we're constructed, how we function. It seemed kind of important. So that was just coming again from curiosity, like, well, what a wonderful way to really know how we're built, how we function, why sometimes we're not healthy, and what we can do to regain our health, restore our health. The other side of that was a relative mission, to use the word loosely, of helping others, and helping others by educating them. So from, again, a precocious age, I enjoyed not only learning things, but sharing it with others. And parapsychology came on the horizon because, aside from medicine later on, it was just so utterly fascinating to explore the further reaches of consciousness, of reality. And at the time, it was very controversial. It was very difficult to legitimately do research or even talk about it in certain academic circles. But I was young and curious and wanted to be at the leading edge. Okay, but going back to the curiosity. So I got deeply involved at a pretty young age in that. Even as a teenager, I started doing little experiments to test it out, so to speak, as well as finding whatever I could to read. This is obviously pre-internet years. The turning point for me, though, in terms of where I am now, came about just a few years ago. I went on, as you partly have shared in that wonderful introduction, doing many other things. So I had my medical practice, I had an academic career, I was heading up my company Syntrek and working in different countries with all types of industries and different sectors. This was a pretty busy life, and I had left behind for the time the deep interest I first had in terms of curiosity in parapsychology, researching on an extended capacities of our mind, sometimes called properly just ESP, but that's not really a proper term. It's one of the popular consciousness still. But again, a few years ago, I was invited because of my history, because of that first book, Inner Spaces, Parapsychological Explorations of the Mind, almost half a century ago. Somebody who was involved with an organization of healers who do what's called sometimes therapeutic touch, or what biblically was referred to as laying on of hands. There's different terms, or energy medicine, energy psychology. And it was for their annual conference. It would be a keynote presentation. And to do it justice, to honor the invitation, I did a very deep dive into almost half a century of the accumulated research in parapsychology, since I was very hotly involved in it with my book and teaching it at the university, as well as looking at the latest developments in modern physics, usually referred to as quantum mechanics, as well as comparative studies of how different religions understand and envision the world and give us guidance to live the good and healthy life in this world. And even going back before that to the indigenous teachings before they even formalized, as we call the major religions. And then some of the leading research now at the gates have opened for psychedelic research. What we were finding about brain functioning in controlled laboratory studies of psychedelics. The research, too, that was coming out, which was totally evidence-based on neuroplasticity, how our thoughts can rewire our brain. So it's not the brain produces consciousness. Consciousness goes through the brain and can modulate the brain itself physically. So as I'm going through this really deep data dump, and it's deep, I'm only saying a few words, but phenomenal when you think about a half century in all these different fields, deeply. And then one day, Supatra, as I was still formulating my ideas for the upcoming presentation several weeks to come, I had an experience in just a minute or two of time. I wasn't timing it. Totally unexpected. This was an experience, not simply an understanding or realization. Some might even call it a revelation. I suddenly did a total 100-degree flip on my understanding and perception of reality. Again, unexpected. So here I was doing research on the leading edges of consciousness and reality in terms of quantum mechanics and so on, but not expecting this flip, because I was still assuming that the scientific Western understanding of reality being something somewhat fixed out there that has some predictability and some controllability, that was the reality. I wasn't totally convinced that the brain was the source, again, of consciousness, going back to my early interest in parapsychology, but I knew it had a relationship to consciousness. But I still was accepting fundamentally, if you like, that we're in a world of separate beings, separate entities, separate things, objects. So broadly, I was still in that framework and still approaching it scientifically. But with this experience, I suddenly realized all of that, as is described in some of the old yoga texts, is Maya. It's all illusion. Mm. So that was accompanied. This is all very fast, a minute or two, if that.
And describe it a little bit more. What was the realization?
The realization was that everything is coming, everything, from within a deeper level of consciousness. And I'm a connection and expression of that. But there's nothing out there at all. There are no people. There are no things. There is no nature. There is no universe. It's all in here. It's all deeply within us. And it's projected outwardly. And we buy into this illusion. That's the reality out there. Not. It's a level of reality. So given in this realization, though, of this flippant, again, of the reality is internal. We call this the primacy of consciousness, as opposed to materialism or physicalism, as sometimes referred to. It suddenly also meant, emotionally, if I could say it this way, it was horrific loneliness. So I'm like the only person left, and there's not even a world. And like infinite boredom and loneliness. Then it flipped, fortunately, morphed very quickly again into the opposite. No. I'm connected to everyone and everything. Mm-hmm. So that's the long answer.
Wow.
To the question.
And very, deep and introspective. And I think in alignment with so many consciousness researchers out there, Dr. Joe Dispenza, I think being one of the major ones.
Yes.
But there's so many people who are studying this. And I've had people on my podcast previously who are very interested in the nature of consciousness. Why is it so controversial? Why is it such a taboo topic, especially in the sciences, medicine, even psychology tends to look at it with suspicion, even though we're finding so much coming from studies in quantum physics that support
Mhm.
the nature and the idea of, universal
Yes.
consciousness. Why is it so controversial?
Well, as I say in my book, I actually start my book by saying, we all, whether we realize it or not, have filters. So we think we see the same reality. We think we understand things the same way, but we don't. I mean, one example is political divisiveness right now in the world, and a proof where people arguably are in the same physical reality, but they have two completely different perceptions of that. And then we could even talk in psychiatric situations where it's more extreme. So coming back to your question, so whether we like it or not, we all have these, again, filters, how we see, interpret, and feel and react to things. Secondly, we also have conditioned prejudices, basically, which are running rampant right now with all the divisiveness we're seeing in so many different ways in the world. And the sciences themselves are also a form of business. When you're, for example, in the university on faculty, you may have the expression publish or perish. If you want to keep a faculty position as a teacher, you have to keep doing research, not just in some, hideaway laboratory, but that you can be published in major journals for the reputation of the university, and so they can attract more, donor support and so
Right.
on. And that's a real pressure. And consequently, as you may or may not know, there's a severe replication crisis in science, and particularly, by the way, in psychology, meaning that the studies aren't so well organized. They're just pushed through for people that get their doctorates. So you have this investment, again, in an establishment, in a sense, to preserve the way things are. Just like, if you remember, a few decades ago, the cigarette lobby. It was in their business interest to promote cigarettes okay. And then, there's scaremongers trying to tell people it causes cancer and so on. It's not that dissimilar. And then if you also look at religion and how different religions, again, see things so differently. And I find it interesting, even in Christianity, as I was doing research for my book, there's over 45,000 denominations of just Christianity in the world.
Wow.
Like, such
I have
incredible.
no idea that there
I know,
were
most
so
people-
many.
And that's just Christianity alone, over
Wow.
45,000. So again, back to my point with filters and, and conditioning, and we don't necessarily see things really as they are. I think too, as I say, as I understand it, we're an extension of consciousness from a different level. I call it in my book, the universal mind. These days, I'm more comfortable even calling it source. It's the source of everything. So we're here, like I call it, as amphibious beings. We can live in two levels, two dimensions. So we can dimension where we experience ourselves as relatively different people, and it's company and stimulation, and sometimes challenge and competition, and then the enrichment and challenges of nature around us and so on. But then there's another level where we go deeper within ourselves, which strangely enough connects us all, as I understand it now. And like amphibians, we can live in more than one dimension, more than an element, like frogs, salamanders can live on land or on the water. And we have that capacity, again, to live in two different dimensions. But in this extension of us into our individuality, and I hope this isn't too deep for you.
No, let's go deep, please.
We also develop ego. Ego enhances our sense of separation, both in terms of fear of others and competitiveness with others. And the ego is like a psychological cancer, potentially. It's only healthy when it's somewhat, how should I say, constrained, restrained, or balanced. But it's not so hard for it to become unhealthy, just as with, physical things in our bodies. And it's usually desiring to be protective of its individuality, as it is somewhat competitive, and wanting better for its future, for maybe its family, friends, neighbor, whatever, nation, whatever it might be. And that again causes more investment in a certain, ideology or value system and power system. So as we get more into the egoistic state, which I call egoistic consciousness, we're more and more distracted by the divisiveness, either fearing it, so we're more like separate and lonely and feeling vulnerable, or wanting to conquer and acquire big time. And you see this playing out in the world right now.
Of course.
And
I think
it's
it's always
almost
played out in
and,
the
and,
world.
and it's almost like an addiction. Like even on a smaller level, I mean, most of us these days use these magic phones, um, which can connect you to almost anyone, anywhere in the world, anytime. Almost, if you know how to play with and network connections and so on. But everything has consequences. All choices have consequences, good or bad. And this is also very addictive technology. And the world right now is in a stage where they're extremely addicted to that type of technology. Let's call it screen technology. So I think it has different ways, different things to display on it. And instead of being in touch with what we sometimes call wisdom of the heart, guided by the heart, which I can go really deep on, by the way, if you want me to later on.
Sure.
And not even working with their own intuition or empathy or creativity. More and more just trying to keep up, FOMO, fear of missing out. And you can't keep up because the volume keeps increasing, overwhelming. Tried, no matter how much you might try. But it's also addictive. Like when you start getting social media, you would like someone to maybe respond positively to your post, to like it, to share it, maybe make a favorable comment, maybe even offer you something. It's addictive again. It draws us further into this external, materialistic, individual, separated world, which I repeat is only one level of reality, not the deepest level. But that's what's happening. We get so caught up in it. Again, long answer to your question.
Well, okay, this spawns a million questions, but I do want to go back to something that you said very early on that might interest. You said when you first started to become interested in consciousness, you started to do experiments on yourself. And so I want to know what those experiments were.
The first one I remember doing was one where I would sit in the back of a streetcar or a bus and focus on someone at the very front, literally in the first row or two, the very front of the bus. I would not make any sound whatsoever. And I would choose someone that I was going to focus on with the intention that they would become aware that I was looking at them and trying to sort of connect in a way with them. And I would know that in two ways. One, because they would start just moving around in a way that was untypical before I started this. And eventually, like to get a bingo on this score, bullseye score, they would have to actually turn around and look right at me. And I was able to do it.
Whoa.
And then I tried to make it more difficult. I chose someone in front reading a book or a newspaper. So they're like more distracted. It still worked. I would choose people who were sitting together and talking to each other. So again, more distracted. It still worked. This is obviously not a laboratory type of experiment. We now know that it's scopaesthesia. It's actually now recognized as one of the forms of psychic phenomena. But that's how it started. And then there were another, almost game that was played to me. I was a camp counselor as a teenager. And the other counselors knew of my interest in this area, this weird area. And they decided to play a little trick on me. So they were having a bit of after everything was settled down, and the campers were in bed and everything, just a gathering for the counselors themselves. And sort of a mini party, nothing extravagant. And before I came in, they had decided amongst themselves, a group of them, that they were going to suggest, because of my interest, doing a ESP test, as it used to be called. And they would pick an object before I came in a different room of the building that they were in at the time. And they would ask me to sort of guess what was on their mind, or telepathically read their mind, so to speak. They had 3 objects in mind. I didn't ask for this. As I walked into it, I thought, okay, we'll play. And I got 2 out of 3 and blew their minds. Blew mine a bit too, because I didn't even know I could do that.
Holy cow. So let me ask you this. When you were vibing I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
just name it, vibing
Mm-hmm.
people on the bus. Did you have a particular way that you were doing this? How did you actually do it?
So it's two things that I understand better now when I talk about my book, Manifestation. But so partly, if you like, it's working with imagination,
Mhm.
like imagining I could, contact someone at the front again of a vehicle or guess maybe what was in someone's mind. Not necessarily knowing how, just imagining that possibility. And then the intention for it.
So imagination and intention.
Those are the keys.
That
And
is
not getting in
yeah.
your own way on our self limiting beliefs. What is impossible? It's improbable.
Yes. And then just believing. I certainly use that a lot therapeutically with my clients.
Mm-hmm.
Imagination, visualization, and
Mm-hmm.
trying to get out of your own way. And that taps into a higher consciousness
Mm-hmm.
within yourself
Mm-hmm.
that is also connected to others. That's how people might be able to quote hear you from the back of the bus, or might be able enable you
Mm-hmm.
to call out an object that
Mm-hmm.
you can't see. You are tapping into a higher level of yourself. You had also said, and I'm really curious about this, like we're salamanders in a way. We live on this plane of
Mm-hmm.
reality and we are connected in this plane of reality. We're not necessarily like alone when you're actually really like you were doing your deep
Mm-hmm.
dive into consciousness and seeing what we're actually manipulating and what's
Mm-hmm.
actually reality. And you had mentioned going deeper down into yourself to access that. Can you just go into a little bit more of an explanation for somebody who might not understand exactly what that means?
Oh, and it is not so easy to understand or unpack. So, first of all, to begin with, in a way, it's not going more deeply into yourself because self is kind of ego from other selves. All
Right.
right. So, you're trying to go to a level beyond that. So, it's more about what in Buddhism is called non attachment. You're not attached to anything, not your ego, not your body, not some emotion, not some sensation, not what's going on around you, not expectations of others for whatever reason you're where you are at the time. You let go of all of that. So, and I don't want to say it's simply surrendering because that sounds like we're just making ourselves sort of weak or defenseless. It's the opposite of that. It's actually so it's more like letting go of the distractions to experience what is there more deeply.
Essentially meditation.
That's one of the roots for sure. And I
And s
also think lucid dreaming, for some people to do that for them as well.
and say someone were and I've been practicing meditation
Mm-hmm.
regularly since 2012, and so I do know that feeling. It's so interesting that you said going kinda deeper
Mm-hmm.
into yourself. I always imagine it as rising out of myself and connecting
It's
out
it's the same
of
thing
myself.
because you're still transcending in this level. It's the same
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
So I don't think of it as
And
up or down.
right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of imagine myself just kind of floating out of
Mm-hmm.
myself and kind of leaving the heaviness of the world and the body behind
Mm-hmm.
and just connecting. And I have no idea, honestly, where I
That's
go.
actually one of the out of body techniques. When people have out of body experiences, they actually visualize
Yeah.
that till it happens for
Yeah.
some.
All I know is when I do connect to
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that we are all connected to, when I come out of that, I feel free. I feel peace. I
Mm-hmm.
feel calm. And I also think that the more that we do this, the less embroiled we are in the little, vicissitudes of our
That's right.
current understanding of reality. I think people just tend to get really myopically focused,
Mm-hmm.
and that's because of their phones, that's because of media, that's because of whoever's
Mm-hmm.
loudest in the room.
Yeah.
But when you actually meditate and you connect on that deeper level more often, you're more of an objective observer than you are embroiled in
You're
it.
right.
And I do
Exactly. The
think,
non-attachment. Yeah.
yes,
Exactly.
and I think you do tend to not live in your ego
Mm.
as much, or you tend to just be aware, "Oh, that's where my ego is right now."
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, and that I think on a psychological level, even if the concepts of consciousness, of quantum physics and things
Mm-hmm.
like that is just kind of over people's heads, or they just don't necessarily
Mm-hmm.
want to believe in it. I think the power in tapping into our highest self, and that's kind of where we are the most aware, the most non-judgmental, or the least judgmental, the most
Uh-huh.
non-judgmental, and the least judgmental, same
That's like
thing.
less filtering.
That's, I think, where the most relief actually happens and the most connection, when we realize that we are a part of something bigger, that it's not just all about what's happening with us myopically. But okay, we could talk about this all day, and I want to, but we're out of time for this half of this podcast. I can't believe it. I have like all these questions. I didn't even answer them. I just
You'd be
I told
surprised
you.
all the things that came up for me that I'd like to talk about too.
I know. So fascinating. But everyone, you guys got to come back. Dr. Howard Eisenberg, he is the man. And we are talking about consciousness, and we are going deep, you guys, today. So you got to come back for the second half of this amazing podcast with physician, psychologist, and consciousness researcher, Dr. Howard Eisenberg. Thanks for tuning into the ANEW Insight Podcast. Please remember, the contents shared on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. You can find us anywhere podcasts are streaming, on YouTube at my.anew.insight and at anew-insight.com under the ANEW Insight Podcast tab. And follow us on our socials at my.anew.insight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads for more updates. Tune in next time and evolve with us.